The Almighty says this must be a fashionable fight. It's drawn the finest people. Where is thy salute?
For presenting yourselves on this battlefield. I give you thanks.
This is our army. To join it, you give homage.
I give homage to Scotland. And if this is your army, why does it go?
We didn't come here to fight for them.
Oh! The English are too many.
Sons of Scotland, I am William Wallace.
William Wallace is 7 feet tall.
Yes, I've heard. He kills men by the hundred. And if he were here, he'd consume the English with fireballs from his eyes and bolts of lightning from his arse. I am William Wallace. And I see a whole army of my countrymen here in defiance of tyranny. You've come to fight as free men. And free men you are. What will you do without freedom? Will you fight?
Against that? No! We will run!
And we will live. Alright? Fight and you may die. Run and you'll live. At least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
All right. Now, first off, did you have just any immediate reactions to, Mel Gibson and his, big old victory speech here? Yeah.
Very bombastic.
Yes, of course. Firing up. He wants not just the army of Scotland to be fired up, he wants you, the people, to be fired up. Now, one Scottish historian famously said, if you watch this film, you will know less about Scottish history than you did going into this film. Now, here's just a couple of examples of what I'm talking about here. They had not worn that face paint on their faces for hundreds of years at this point in Scotland. They would not wear the kilts until hundreds of years later. William Wallace was not a poor man from the mountains. He was actually this middle Scottish nobleman who actually was well-traveled. He went back and forth between these different courts in Europe trying to, rally these Europeans to the Scottish cause. And the entire plot of this film, what drives this forward, this evil King Edward Longshanks has basically decided he's going to rape and murder the people of Scotland out of existence. This Longshanks was not a particularly nice guy by our standards, but he was not just this barbaric, I'm going to slaughter my way through Scotland kind of tyrant. And his son, Edward II, he actually is portrayed in this film as this kind of sniveling, lisping gay person. And what's funny about this film is that later on, when historians analyzed it, they actually said this taught you as much about the ideology of Mel Gibson himself as it did the ideology of William Wallace. Because, Gibson clearly wants there to be this world where good and evil is obvious. The evil guys are, these horrible, barbaric kings and these lisping gay people. And these are people that deserve to be cut down before the bold manliness of William Wallace. There are historians who have said that the attitudes of its own creator are much more apparent in this film than any aspect of Scottish history. Oh, and one more thing. You might have noticed, where are they holding that battle there between the massive Scottish and the massive English armies?
A field.
A field. Well, it's called the Battle of Stirling in this film. Its actual name is the Battle of Stirling Bridge. And what happened at Stirling Bridge was the Scottish and the English met in this area. There's this bridge that the English had to cross. The Scottish pinned them and massacred them on the bridge. So, when Mel Gibson was filming the sequence, one of the Scottish guys walked up to him and said, "Why didn't you just film it at the actual site of Stirling?" And Mel Gibson said, "Because that damn bridge kept getting in the way." And the Scottish guy said, "Well, yeah, that's what the English found out back in the 13th century." So this is definitely not a film that I would go to for any kind of historical accuracy. But this is so, you have like films, we talked about positive examples of films and the historical discussion that they generated. You could argue this is kind of a negative example of this. For many people, the only Scottish history they know is the film of Braveheart. In that case, they don't know any Scottish history. So, yeah, so did you have any questions or thoughts about Braveheart and the reaction to this film? Yeah?
I was going to say also the romantic interest in this movie was actually 7 years old and living in France at the time.
That's true, yeah. And so the princess that he romances in this movie was a little kid at the time William Wallace was killed. Oh, also in this film, Longshanks dies the same day as William Wallace. He outlived Wallace by 3 or 4 years or something like that. So anyway, I can go on and on about this film. So. Oh, that is true. In fact, that is maybe the only actual fact in this film, is he is horribly tortured to death, and his head is impaled on a pike and paraded around as an example to everyone. But that's kind of just what you did back in the Middle Ages, you know, so there was nothing particularly noteworthy about that. So, yeah, but, so, any other questions, thoughts about the response to this film? Well, yeah.
Freedom speech is more for us in this day.
It is.
It never happened, and that wasn't a motivating factor for that army.
Yeah. In fact, the Scottish were fighting for independence, but it was led by wealthy noblemen as much as it was common people. It was a dispute between the upper classes as much as it was anything else. Now, yeah.
I was going to say, as kind of a continuation of what he was saying, is it wasn't so much, we're going to be free as individuals, it's, no, we're just not going to be that guy's peasants, we're going to be the new guy's peasants.
Yeah, one of the guys in the army made a comment about that. He's kind of right about that whole thing. So, as I mentioned, I can go on and on about that film, but I'll start to wrap things up here. So, obviously, Hollywood has played a major role in the way that the general public views historical events. And to many historians, they love when Hollywood covers all these forgotten corners of history. They love when they bring these stories to light that a lot of ordinary people had never heard of. One film that I'm kind of excited about and I'm really hoping is good, there's this Matthew McConaughey film that's coming out in a few months called The Free State of Jones, about these rebels in Mississippi who tried to break free from the Confederacy because they supported racial equality. That, as you might imagine, is definitely a historical story that is worth telling. So I really hope that that film is good and accurate, who knows. But there is also a downside to depending on Hollywood to educate your masses, because whenever there are severe distortions from these films, those are often facts that are just repeated by the general public. So if you ask anyone to tell you any details of the life of William Wallace, they'll describe you Mel Gibson as much as they will anyone else. So, did you have any other final questions or thoughts for me before we start to wrap this up? Yes?
Well, The Revenant came out earlier
Did?
this year.
The Revenant. That is an interesting question. The Revenant actually, it was a film to win Leonardo DiCaprio an Oscar as much as it was anything else. That movie tortures and brutalizes DiCaprio the whole time, and that's what you have to do in Hollywood to win an Oscar. And it worked for him in that regard. Now, the basic story of The Revenant is true. This guy died, they thought he was dead, they left him for dead, they took his stuff and they moved on. But a lot of the other stuff in that film is totally invented. He never had a son who was murdered. He in fact pursued these guys across the wilderness because he just wanted his stuff back. So in that respect, the film really dramatized those events. So, and you could spend all night asking me about these different films here, but yeah.
As an historian, what do historians do to correct this imbalance of, we learn it from the movies and it's 90% inaccurate and not changing the history of the schools? What do we do?
Well, we do the best we can, and the most obvious answer I would give to that is anyone who takes college history classes tends to get a better view of the historical record. Alas, as we know, most Americans never do that. So a good way to go about trying to educate people is encourage them. Watch this film. If you're interested in this film, study up on that actual time period. many times that actual story is a lot more interesting than whatever it was that Hollywood has dreamed up. Sometimes Hollywood can't do great stories just because, let's say, they stretch out over 30 or 40 years or something like that. It's very difficult for Hollywood to do a story like that. So whenever you have people who ask you about historical films and they question you about these, it's always a good idea to encourage them, do your own research about this. And as historians, we do the best we can. One of the things you'll notice, right when a major film comes out, all across these magazines, historical journals, they are publishing these articles analyzing this film from a historical perspective. These are easy to find online usually whenever a major Hollywood film comes out. The key is convincing people to read this stuff. Yeah?
Are there historically accurate films that
Oh,
generally most
That was my
historians
question,
agree
like, what's your favorite?
are?
Oh, yes, of course. For instance, I didn't play any clips of it, but that 2012 film Lincoln was pretty good. They invented some individual scenes, but it really captured the essence both of Lincoln and this national debate they were having over the 13th Amendment. The movie Glory was a great Civil War film about the black soldiers' experience in the Civil War. They ended up changing some scenes just because they wanted them to look better on film, but generally that is a very historically accurate film there. So there are all of these great examples in Hollywood of these films. I mentioned Platoon. It really actually correctly portrays like the battlefield and what it looked like in Vietnam. So there are all of these instances of historical films that get this totally right. A good way to look into this, there are often like lists you can find online, like movies that capture this relatively well, movies that don't, it's always a good idea to see if you can find historians who are willing to comment about things like this. So that's a very good question. Once again, it'd take me all night to go through every film that is and is not accurate, but yeah.
Yeah, you want to do your own research.
Yes.
Whether it's from a movie, you go back to the internet, or a book, you go into the internet. Would you give us some guidelines as to, because you can't believe everything you read on the internet, right?
Yes. Oh, that's very true. One great place to start with that, there are academic historical journals that are accessible through sites like .edus, .govs. These databases that are considered to be collections of these sources that are, hang on, what's the word I'm looking for? These sources that have been confirmed by other scholars. Peer review, thank you, that's what I'm looking for. So there are all of these collections of internet databases of sources that are considered to be peer reviewed. Like other scholars have analyzed this, approved of it, and so that is a great way to figure out what is and what is not reliable information on the internet. Because as we all know, there are all of these sites that will give you totally unreliable information. So that's another very good question there. I see I've gone above and beyond my time. You guys, once again, as always, we're a tremendous group. My cookies are running out already, but there are some remnants up here, so feel free to come up and take some. Other than that,